Hey guys, what is going on? Happy Tuesday. I think it's Tuesday. I never know what day it is anymore. Now that I work for myself, I hardly ever know what day it is anymore. So anyway, welcome. Super excited to be doing these trainings. So just for anyone who's just getting on or who's new to me, welcome. I'm Jennifer Blanchard. I'm an author and a book mindset and success coach. I help people to go after their dreams, especially their creative dreams, and to know that they can have absolutely anything that they desire as long as they do the work. And that includes mindset as well as the actual physical taking action. So welcome to my community. If you are new, I would love to just say hi in the comments. Let me know, what interested you in this training. I would love to just hear from you. I know most of you are going to watch this as a replay because I always pick really weird times to do my live streams. I know. So it's all good. If you're watching this as a replay, welcome. Feel free to comment as well. Okay, so I am actually doing a series. It's a 3-part series we're doing over the next 3 days. So starting today with this training, and then tomorrow we're doing a training, and then again on Thursday, and each one will have a different topic, obviously. But they're all related to writing nonfiction books. And I think that writing nonfiction books is something that a lot of writers discount because they immediately hear nonfiction and they think textbook, or they think really boring business book that no one wants to read. And maybe that was the case years and years ago, but it's not anymore. And there's actually a ton of benefit to having a nonfiction book published, especially if you're a coach, especially if you're an entrepreneur, especially if you would like to create a business from your writing and from your books. So for today's training, I thought it would be great to start with defining what a nonfiction book actually is. And then, of course, also differentiating a nonfiction book from a novel and a memoir, because they are different. So this is actually a very common thing I see writers getting confused, is that they think that they, are wanting to write a fiction book, but really they want to write a memoir, and they think that a fiction book is what you do. And so just to, again, be clear on all of this, because I want you to not only know what options are available to you, but then also be clear on, what it is you actually want to write. Because I think sometimes we tell ourselves, like, hopefully that will reconnect me. Sorry about that. I just hit the lock button on my phone trying to fix this thing. Hopefully we're good now. So, okay, we're going to go over the differences between a novel, a memoir, and a nonfiction book so that you're very clear on what these are, and so that you know exactly which one you actually want to write, or if you want to write multiple. So I write fiction, nonfiction, and I'm actually getting into memoir this year as well. So I've been sort of playing around with a couple of ideas and outlining some stuff. So, but I just wanted to just give you the information, because again, if you aren't sure what you're working on or what you actually want to write, it's going to become a block or a challenge that gets in the way of you actually just taking action on it. So, so if you've ever been confused and you're like, I don't know the difference between a novel, a nonfiction book, and a memoir, then stick around, because I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. Okay, so first of all, a novel. What is a novel? Now, a novel is something very specific. So I've actually heard people use novel interchangeably with the word book. So I want to write a novel. I want to write a book. I want to write a novel. I want to write a book. Not the same thing. I mean, yes, a novel is a type of book, but it's definitely not just anything you would want to do. A novel is something very specific. So first of all, a novel is fiction. What this means is it's a made-up story. It's not true. It's completely fictionalized, completely made up from someone's imagination. Now, it might be based on something real, so maybe an event that happened, or something that happened to that author, or something that happened in their life, or something like that, but it's all been fictionalized. So all the characters are fake. Even if they're based on real people, they're fake. They're not actual real people. The story is made up, so everything is made up. The cool thing about fiction is that you actually tell life's truths through making up a story, and to illustrate a point, or to illustrate a message or a theme that you want to get across to a reader, you do that with a fictional story. So a made-up story that you've now used to bring that message or that idea to life. The other day I wrote out a definition of, and I'm always talking about the different definitions of story. Really, the definition of story is a protagonist that wants something, an antagonist that opposes what the protagonist wants, and a journey that ensues because of it. So that is the definition of a novel. That's what makes it a novel versus an episodic narrative or a memoir or a nonfiction book, is that it's very specific. But the thing people confuse, even with fiction, and this goes into memoir as well, which I'm going to mention, But the thing that they confuse is that they think a story is supposed to be about a character's entire life. So I just recently got an email from an author who wrote a book. It's 270,000 words, so way too long for a novel. I mean, beyond, and I actually wrote back and told him that it was obnoxious to have that many words in your novel. But the reason that he had that many words is because he wrote an episodic narrative where he basically gave the day-to-day life occurrences of a character from age 12 all the way through high school. So we literally saw this girl's entire life, and he was planning a 3-book series. So the next version was going to be college years. The year after that is her years doing something else. Well, all of that gives you an episodic narrative, which is not a novel. This is key. Keep this in mind. Now, if you want to write fiction, a novel, fiction, then you have to know the difference between a novel and an actual story and an episodic narrative. An episodic narrative is basically the day-to-day occurrence of a character's life, or a year-to-year occurrence if it's taking, going over a longer time period. But there is no endpoint. So with an actual story, there is a true endpoint because you have a goal in place that the character has to achieve by the end of the story or not. And so you have an endpoint. Whereas with an episodic narrative, it's just this happened, then 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 this happened. But it could go on forever because unless the character dies, it could go on forever. There's no real breaking point to making it a story. So the definition that I actually wrote out the other day, and I'm going to read it because I want to make sure I say it exactly as how I wrote it. This, I feel like, is the best way to understand what a novel actually is and the specifics of it. And really, this definition applies to memoir, it applies to nonfiction if you are including storytelling in your nonfiction, which I will get to in a few minutes. But this is the definition. So a story doesn't focus on someone's entire life and all that happened to them. A story is a specific time in a person's life where they dealt with opposition of some kind, aka an antagonist or a bad guy, and then how they overcame that opposition. So that's what a story actually is, and that specifically is what a novel is. So in a novel, you have a fictionalized story that you've made up that shows us the time in a character's life when they dealt with opposition, when they had a goal of some kind, and then there was an antagonist who came in and tried to oppose them achieving that goal. And then, of course, that's what this actual story comes from, is, okay, now this character is going to overcome this goal or overcome this bad guy to achieve this goal. And so that's what makes it a story. And this is true of any type of writing, anything related to storytelling, but I'm talking specifically about writing a novel, which is fiction. Again, fiction being fictionalized, made-up story that's not actually true. But again, it can be based on things that are true, and it may even be telling something true that happens in life, but it's fictional. So it's made-up story, made-up characters, all that stuff is fake. That's the difference between a novel and other things, which we're going to talk about on this live stream. So again, if anyone has questions or anything along the way, just let me know. I know a lot of you are going to watch this as a replay, so feel free to put questions in. I will come back and check them later. Okay, so that's the difference between a novel. Now, what's a memoir then? If a novel is fiction and it's a made-up story, then what's a memoir? Okay, so a memoir, and if you do want to write memoir, I highly, highly recommend checking out Marion Roach-Smith. She is a total badass. Not only is she a memoirist, but she teaches people how to write memoir. I met her a couple of years ago at a writing conference. She is freaking phenomenal. I learned everything I know about memoir from her, and I'm really, really thrilled that I did, because the huge mistake writers make with memoir, I'm not going to make, because I learned what it actually takes to write a memoir. So if that's something you're interested in, then again, stick around, because we're going to be talking about that right now. Okay, so what is a memoir? Well, first of all, what is a memoir not? So going back to my original definition that I just read a few seconds ago, a memoir does not focus on a character, or a person rather, does not focus on their entire life. So this is the mistake writers make with memoir over and over and over again, is that they think, oh, I'm going to share my life story in a book. I'm going to write a book and I'm going to share my life story. And then they end up having, they start at age 5 when something happened to them. And then, they talk about high school, they talk about college, and they just go through their entire life. That is not what a memoir actually is. And that is a huge, huge issue that writers have when it comes to writing memoir, because they think, oh, I'm supposed to write about my life story. No, not true. Not true at all. And this is what I've learned from Marion. So Marion told me this, and the first time she told me, I thought, literally wanted to smack myself in the forehead. Oh my God, of course, makes so much sense. Especially from all the memoir I had looked at or read and realized, oh yeah, that's exactly what they did. So this is what a memoir actually is. A memoir, and this is what Marion says, is a memoir is not about what happened to you. It's about what you did with it. So a memoir is about transformation. It's about getting a bigger message or a life lesson through to the reader, and then using specific stories or events in your life to illustrate the point that you're trying to make with the memoir. So as an example, let's say you wanted to write a memoir about, and I'll just use my example of what I'm actually doing for a memoir I'm working on. So I wanted to write a story about my dog. I wanted to write a memoir about my experience raising my dog, with just the joy that came from it, and really because I've always been terrified of dogs, just showing how joyful it can be when you just face your fear. So originally I thought, I'm going to write this story about my dog and all the stuff that happened to us. But then when I talked to Marion, it was like, oh no, that doesn't make sense. It would actually be wrong to try to write a story where I just talked about every little thing that happened with my dog and with me. And no, because that's not what a memoir is. A memoir is not a full version of someone's life story. Now, maybe you've read stuff like that. Then that's not actually a memoir. It's an autobiography or a biography, depending if it was written by the person or if it was written by someone about the person. A biography would actually go over multiple years of a person's life and possibly their entire journey in their life, because it's a biography. It's a specific book that's all about this person's life. But that's not what a memoir is. So very, very big differentiation here is that a memoir is about transformation. So again, back to what Marion had told me was, you have to think about what is the bigger message here? What was the transformation that you made? So the first thing that came to mind was, I learned how to be comfortable having my own dog, raising a dog, being around dogs. I also learned how to face my fear head on, challenge myself to take on a fear that I'd had for such a long time, and overcame it. So, okay, great. What's the message in that? Well, the message is that you can do anything if you are just willing to face your fear. So it's basically, the message is that you can overcome your fears by facing it head on. That's the challenge of it, but really you can move past it if you just face it head on. That's the message that I want people to take away from the memoir. And then it's like, okay, what events, happenings, things in your life can you use to illustrate that point, that when you face your fear head on, it goes away and that you can overcome it. So what are the things you can point out for that? Now for me, I'm focusing on telling the story of my dog. So I'm looking for specific things that happened over the course of my time raising this dog. And of course, I still have him. But up to this point, what little anecdotes or events that happen or things that happen can I use to explain the transformation that I made from being afraid of dogs to being where I am now, where I'm not afraid of dogs and I can handle being around dogs and it's okay. And so it's going through all of that. Now, first it's illustrating, where did that fear come from? Well, okay, when I was a kid, I saw my brother get bit by a dog, practically took off half his face and scared the shit out of me. So I was always afraid of dogs from a very young age. So what I wouldn't do now is tell you the entire life story of when that happened with my brother and then all the stuff that happened leading up to the point where I finally decided to get my own dog. No, because that's not what a memoir is. So a memoir would be, okay, well, the transformation is how I went from that scared little girl to where I am now, which was the day I decided that I was going to face that fear head on by getting a dog of my own, which was one of the scariest decisions I've ever made in my entire life. But then again, it was also one of the best decisions I've ever made, because now I have that little bugger right there who's pretending to sleep because he's annoyed that he's bored. But I wouldn't have him and my life wouldn't be so joyful and so fulfilled with this, little dog if I hadn't faced that fear. So that is a memoir. A memoir is not about everything that happens to a person. A memoir is about a specific transformation that you've gone through and then illustrating a point that you've made, so a point that you're making or a message you want to get across, and then illustrating it by picking specific things that happened in your life that represent that overall message and represent what you're trying to bring to life. So Marion always says it like, use it to illustrate your point. So if your point is you can overcome your fear by facing it head on, great, that's the transformation. Now, what can you pull out of your life story to illustrate that? And in my case, it's, okay, well, I'm pulling out anecdotes related to my dog because that's how I overcame that fear. So that's what a memoir is. And a memoir does not cover a person's entire life story or entire journey. Big, big mistake there. If you're writing a memoir where you're covering your entire life story, you're not writing a memoir, you're writing a biography. Big, big difference. Is a true crime like a memoir? No. A true crime is usually a novel. So not always, but most of the time, a true crime is basically taking a crime and fictionalizing it and then telling the story of how it happened, but actually doing it in a way where it's fictionalized. So it's not actually true. And I have some examples here I should show you guys. So this is a really good true crime story. It's a novel. It's called The Jasmine Trade. It's written by an author who is a journalist, and she actually was part of helping to bring down a sex trafficking ring. And so she wrote a fictional story about that, but she used her own actual things that happened to her, but made it all up. So she fictionalized it, turned it into a novel. Now, if you are doing a true crime story where you're actually talking about real things that happen and you're giving all of the information about the story and all of that, it wouldn't necessarily be a memoir. I think it would probably fall more in the line of a nonfiction book, or maybe a combination. So that's the other thing. I'm giving you specific information about each of these, but of course there are some that merge. So there are some memoirs that are also nonfiction books. There are some fiction novels that also include, true aspects of a person's life, but it's still fiction if it's a novel and it's all fictionalized. So just to sort of keep the definition separate, but again, you will find crossover in the book industry. There's no way around it, because it sometimes just happens, especially if you are wanting to teach people stuff from your life story. So I just edited a book recently from somebody who overcame alcoholism, and it's a memoir that he's writing, but it's also a how-to book, because he's giving specifics of, okay, the first half of the book is memoir, the second half is how-to. It's how he did something. And a lot of you probably have this book, or have read this book on writing, Stephen King. The first half of the book is memoir. It's completely telling the journey of how he got to this place where he is right now. And then, of course, the second half of the book is nonfiction. It's how to be a writer, how to write, and all his advice on writing. So that's, again, it's a combination there. But you have to know the difference, because otherwise you're going to end up writing something that doesn't go anywhere. So hopefully this will give you a good illustration of the differences. Okay, and then the third one. So if you're not writing a novel and you're not writing a memoir, and what could you be writing? So maybe you're writing a nonfiction book. Now, a nonfiction book, again, a lot of times writers hear that word and they immediately think textbook. I'm writing a textbook. I don't want to write a textbook. It's too long, it's too boring, it's too much work. You don't have to write a textbook. Just because you want to write nonfiction doesn't mean you're writing a textbook. I have never in my life written a textbook, and I've written 9 nonfiction books. So if you are interested in nonfiction, don't think, oh my God, I have to write this long-ass textbook. And no. Now, nonfiction books do tend to be more how-to type, self-help type, where it's someone is looking to learn how to do something or looking to learn more information about something. And so the nonfiction book brings that to them and gives them that, here's how to do it. Here's how you can figure it out on your own, so you don't have to hire someone or pay someone, and you can see the shelf behind me. I have a shitload of nonfiction books about how to be a writer, how to write fiction, how to write nonfiction, but it's all nonfiction because it's teaching you how to do something. So as an example, it's one of my all-time favorite nonfiction books, Story Engineering. This one is all about how to write a novel, but it's a how-to, so it's nonfiction, not fiction. Big difference again, because fiction, it would be an actual story. So here we have a fiction novel written by the same author who wrote this. But this is nonfiction because it's a how-to book, and this is fiction because it's a made-up story. So keep that in mind, because that makes a huge difference. The other thing with nonfiction, and this is my opinion on it, is that I think a lot of times writers overwhelm themselves by thinking that their nonfiction book has to be this hundreds of pages. It has to be really thick. It has to be this 400-page, crazy book with all this information in it. And honestly, maybe that was true a long time ago, but it's really not the case anymore. And I tend to think that Amazon is starting to recognize what I've been saying for years is an up-and-coming trend, which is that nonfiction books are being written shorter. So rather than a 400-page book that covers every little thing you need to know about something, it's honing in on a specific aspect of it. Shorter books are actually selling really well on Amazon right now, and Amazon has started to create categories specifically for these books, for short reads, for books that take less than an hour to read or less than 45 minutes to read. They are actually breaking out categories for these books because of that, which is what they started doing a couple of years ago when I started to pick up on this trend that this is a trend. These new people writing nonfiction ebooks now are basically starting to realize that you don't have to do everything in one book. And I honestly believe that focusing on one result in each book makes a bigger difference than trying to cram, 6 different results into one book and making this mega book. Because it's just too much. And think about nonfiction books you've actually read, if you've ever picked any up. Most of the time you don't finish them because they're long, they're drawn out, and they're just really covering stuff that's either repetitive or just not necessary. So I think it's better to write a nonfiction book where you're actually focusing on a specific result and how to get that result, or the specific process of getting that result. And again, I've been seeing books all the time that are coming up that are hitting number 1 on Amazon in their categories, but that are also short reads. They're under 100 pages and they're ebooks. So they're not, you can have them in print as well, obviously, but a lot of them are just ebooks where it's a digital copy and that's it. I would recommend having both print and digital, but it's your choice to do either one. But nonfiction is very much how to, it's process based. It's teaching someone about how to do something or teaching them from your own experience. So that's why I say could combine memoir sometimes. So sometimes a nonfiction book, like in the case of the Stephen King one, will have memoir in it because they're sharing the story of how they know the stuff that they're teaching you. Because a lot of times, if you don't know an author and you see a book from them, you're not going to really feel that they're, okay, they have a book, great, they're probably credible. But if you don't know who they are, then you're not going to resonate that much with them. But if you read this, memoir piece of their nonfiction book where they share with you how they know what they know and how they've learned what they know, well, then you're like, oh, okay, I get it. I resonate with that. It's real. So for me, I was never a big Stephen King fan. I know a lot of people are. It's probably a taboo thing to say in the publishing industry, but I just never was. I don't really like his storytelling. I'm not really into horror. So it was never really that big of a thing for me. I was never really that into it. But when I read On Writing, which I, of course, read because it's the book on writing, right? So I read it, and it made me learn a lot more about him. It made me actually resonate more with him because I realized the struggle and the journey that he went through to become Stephen King, to be this badass author now who, anytime he drops a book, it hits number 1 on, New York Times list, and thousands and thousands and thousands of copies are sold and millions of people read his books. But he didn't start off that way. And so this was such a good nonfiction book because it gave us stories about his own experiences becoming this writer that he is today. And then, of course, as he's teaching you the stuff that he learned, explaining to you how he learned it. So it's like, well, you can't do this and this is why, and giving you all the specifics. So in that case, it's a combination memoir and nonfiction book. Or you could just have straight nonfiction books. So most of the books I write are just straight nonfiction. I might share little anecdotes here and there of things just to illustrate my point or to illustrate how I learned something. But for the most part, I'm teaching you how to do something. And that's nonfiction. But there are lots of different versions of nonfiction books. So there are textbooks, and that does count as nonfiction, but then there are things that are more specific to the stuff that you're interested in. So that you can literally find a nonfiction book about anything. Which is why I tell writers, especially fiction writers, not to discount writing nonfiction. Because nonfiction a lot of times sells better, it makes you more money, it allows you to have an income coming in, which you could then use to fund time to write fiction, which, a lot of people do backwards. So they try to write fiction first and make money from that so that they can write other stuff. But it's like, if you do it the other way around, you can actually, or at the same time, really, because you don't have to separate it. I write fiction and nonfiction simultaneously all the time. I'm always having a nonfiction project, a fiction project that I'm working on. So you don't have to keep them separate. You can work on them both at the same time if you want to. But still, really key thing is that you know that nonfiction actually isn't that boring. And maybe, again, it used to be. So maybe back in the day, nonfiction was just boring textbook how-to. Boring. But it's not really like that anymore, because now you can get books on so many things that are actually interesting that it doesn't feel boring to read it. So here's another example. So there's a couple, actually. I have a bunch, obviously. So here's a really good one, Romancing the Beat. I know all these are backwards. Sorry, guys. This way the Facebook thing works out. But this one is about story structure for romance novels. Totally badass. Love this book. I highlighted the freaking shit out of it because I learned so much. And it's 94 pages, including the suggested reading and the author bio. 94 pages. Super short, super sweet. You can get through it in an hour. And it teaches you how to do something that you want to learn how to do. Here's another one. This is one that I wrote. So all about journaling your writing dreams to life and talking about the 10-minute practice that I do every day. now it's actually longer, but when I wrote this, the 10-minute practice that I do every day that allows me to be the writer that I am right now. This book is 53 pages. 53 pages. And it's one of my highest selling books, especially print copies. So if you've ever been telling yourself like, I don't want to write nonfiction because I have to write this long ass textbook, and you don't have to. You can choose to do a shorter version. Focus on one result. That's the one thing I like about this. One result. How to journal your writing dreams to life. That's the only thing I focus on in the entire book. One result. Romancing the beat. How to write a novel, or how to structure your romance novel. One result. You're not getting multiple results. So I have some books here, you can see down here, bigger ones, that cover more than one result, basically. So multiple results in one book. So it's like it's a 400-page book, but it's showing you how to do this, 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 and this. And maybe all these things tie together in some ways. But I could argue that it would actually be more beneficial for the author and for the reader to have these books broken out into separate books. So that way it's a series, and then you give the chance to actually get the person all the way through the book. Because a lot of times when you pick up a 400-page book about how to improve your money habits or whatever, you're not going to read the whole thing. You're going to get super overwhelmed by all of it. It's going to just feel like, I can't even handle this. I can't even finish reading the book, let alone actually doing the actions in it. But if that 400-page money book was broken down into how to handle personal finances, how to handle business finances, how to handle taxes, how to handle money mindset, if it was all broken out into these little results, then not only could the reader choose, oh, I only need help with this, I only need help with that, or they could go through the series a little at a time, and not only is that making the author more money and more book sales, and of course getting exposed to more readers, but then you also have that very, very good possibility that they're actually going to finish the whole book. So what are the chances if someone picks up this book about journaling your writing dreams to life and another book that's, super thick on it? I mean, what are the chances they're actually going to get through both of these? Well, they're more likely going to finish this one because it's only 53 pages. It's a really easy read. You could read it in like 20 minutes probably. So big difference there. And this is why the way I teach nonfiction writing is that I teach people how to focus on one result in each book. So you're not writing this massive long book that takes years of your life to write, but that really hones in on one specific thing and brings that to life. And then of course you can always continue on with a different book. So that is the biggest differences between nonfiction, memoir, and fiction. Novels specifically. Does anyone have any questions about any of this or anything that I mentioned? I just want to make sure that I give you guys everything that you need to understand the difference, because it makes a difference. It really makes a difference to know what kind of book you're actually interested in writing and whether or not it's right for you. So for a long time, I've seen writers who think I have to write a novel because I'm a writer, so I have to write a novel. But the thing is, you may not care about writing a novel. You may not have any fiction story ideas. So rather than try to force yourself to write a novel because you think you should, think about the other options that are out there for you. And nonfiction is a great one because everybody has skills, everybody has experiences, and everybody has just things that they've been through in their life that they could teach other people about. So everybody has a passion of some kind, and maybe yours is writing, maybe you have another passion. Whatever things you're good at, the skills that you have, you can use in nonfiction books. So maybe you write fiction and that's great, but you think, well, what could I write nonfiction about? So go get a piece of paper, make a list right now of all the skills you have, things you feel really confident that you're really good at, that you think you could teach other people how to do or show other people how to do, or write down all of the experiences you've had related to those things, and then look at that and really take it seriously. What are some other areas I could write nonfiction on? Maybe you don't want to write writing nonfiction. That's fine. You don't have to. So a lot of writers I find don't want to write nonfiction because they think that writing nonfiction means I have to write a how-to writing book. So I have to write a book like this one, like Larry's or something. I have to write a book about how to write a book. You don't have to do that. Not at all. If that's something that doesn't interest you, don't do it. You'd be better off focusing on something else. So maybe you spend a lot of time playing video games. Maybe that's something you have as a hobby. It's a passion of yours. You're really freaking good at it. Hey, maybe you could write a book about how to get better at playing a certain game, or how to be a better gamer in general. Or maybe you could write a book about how to pick the right game so that you know where to put your time and energy into. These are possibilities. Look at other things. Maybe you have a dog that you raised and you're super proud of him because he's super trained and he does such a good job, and you have all these little tricks that you use to help him grow up and actually be a dog that listens, that does what you tell him to do. You could write a how-to book about how to raise a dog, how to raise a specific type of dog, how to, train a dog. There's so many possibilities using the skills and the information and the knowledge and the experiences that you already have inside you, that you've already done and that you're already doing. So for example, I could write a cookbook because I cook all the time. I especially have a point of view because I cook dairy-free, gluten-free food for the most part, usually low carb, no sugar when I can absolutely, find something that doesn't have to have sugar. So that's a really unique angle for a nonfiction cookbook. Or you could do something different. I could do a book about how to write recipes. I could do a book about how to write gluten-free recipes, or how to take things that are not gluten-free and turn them into gluten-free. So all these options come up just from thinking about what skills, what experiences, and what knowledge do you already possess that you could use to help other people. Because really, that's what nonfiction is. Nonfiction helps people better their lives and better themselves. Doesn't mean it's a self-help book, but it can be. So a how-to book is kind of a self-help book in some ways, but it doesn't have to be one of those like Louise Hay, where you have a book about how to heal your life. Well, that is a true self-help book. It helps you to heal your life, but it doesn't have to be. A nonfiction book could be how to write a novel. It could be how to journal. It could be how to structure your story. It could be whatever. So obviously a lot of my examples are writing books because that's what I read. I love writing books. But I've also been reading stuff lately that's not writing books, that are nonfiction. So some other ones that I've read recently, Playing the Matrix, which was all about law of attraction and how to understand the difference between being specific and not being specific. I've recently read that. I'm working on right now a book about manifestation and money and law of attraction stuff. I just read Crushing It, which is a business book by Gary Vee, all about how to crush it in business, online business specifically. So again, it's looking at where are your passions and where are the things you're interested in that you know a lot about, that you have skills in and experiences in that you could share with your readers. So this is why I wanted to talk about the differences between these three types of books, not only so that you're clear on it, but also so you get a little bit inspired to think that maybe you really do have a nonfiction book in you. Maybe you don't have to tell yourself you're just a fiction writer. And again, if you don't have any interest in nonfiction, that's totally fine. But don't limit yourself because you think nonfiction writing means you have to write a book about how to write, or you have to write a textbook, because neither of those things are true. And that's the thing I see from writers all the time is like, well, I write fiction, but I don't want to teach people how to write things. Well, that's okay. You don't have to teach them how to write things. What else do you know how to do? What else are you good at? What other skills do you have that would be beneficial to somebody? These are the questions to ask yourself, and then you'll know whether or not nonfiction is actually a good fit for you or not. All right, does anyone have any other questions? I'm going to wrap this live stream up, and like I said, we have another training tomorrow where I'm actually going to be talking about how to find a badass idea for your nonfiction book. So if you are interested in writing nonfiction, and if this training inspired you and got you excited about, oh, maybe I do have a nonfiction book in me, then stay tuned to my Facebook page. Click like on it if you haven't already so you get notifications when I go live. Trying to go live at 5 p.m. Central Time tomorrow for the training on finding your badass idea for your nonfiction book. But there will be a replay if you can't be there live, so don't worry about that. Let me just check the comments. I just got Larry's book and read right through it. Yes, awesome. Story Engineering is one of those books I read every year. So I have a list of like 3 or 4 books that I read every year, and that's one of them. Even though I've read it at this point probably like 10 times, and I know pretty much everything in it as far as the information, but I also feel like sometimes you can pick up more stuff just by reading the same book over and over again. So certain topics, I'm like all in. I just want to read everything I can find on it, and especially for someone like Larry, who I think, in my opinion, is the best teacher when it comes to understanding how to write a good novel, specifically. Cool. Okay, so like I said, I know a lot of you are going to watch this as a replay, so feel free to comment afterward because I'm happy to go back and respond to your comments and questions, so that I just want to make sure you're really clear on the differences between a novel, a memoir, and a nonfiction book, because there are a variety of things you could be writing, and right now you might be pigeonholing yourself into, I have to just write this one thing, when maybe you could expand your storytelling and not just write fiction, but you could write nonfiction, or you could write memoir. See, for me, a memoir was something I thought I would never touch. 2 years ago, I was like, not a chance. I will never, ever write a memoir. Never. But then I met Marion Roach-Smith, for anyone who didn't hear me talk about her earlier. And she's the most amazing memoir teacher. And she got me so jazzed about writing memoir. And especially once I learned the difference between what a memoir actually is, I was like, oh, let me think about that. Like, what lessons have I learned? What transformations have I gone through? Oh, maybe I do actually have a memoir in me. Maybe this is something that I could do. I never would have thought of that before she taught me that stuff. So now I'm like, oh, I could write a memoir about my dog and how I overcame my fear by facing it head on. And oh, I could do, so I've just got all these ideas of stuff I could write a memoir on because I expanded my mindset around what was possible and, of course, learned the definitions of each of these types of books so that I knew whether or not I would actually be interested in it. And there was also a time when I thought I would never write a nonfiction book. I was like, no, I just want to write fiction. That's my thing. But then it was like, hey, I spent years of my life learning about how to be more productive and coming up with my own ways of being productive and building up my own writing habits. Like, maybe I could help other people. And that's when I started writing nonfiction back in 2010. I was like, hey, maybe I could help other people. So I wrote a nonfiction book about productivity and how to get your ass in a chair and do your writing. And then, of course, it just spiraled from there. So hopefully this training was helpful. I would love to know how it went for you. So again, comment below if you would like to. And if you are interested in writing nonfiction, like I said, be sure to like my Facebook page because I have 2 more trainings happening this week for free. Tomorrow's is about how to find your badass nonfiction book story idea, and the third one on Thursday is going to be all about how to outline your nonfiction book, because you should never ever sit down to write a book, doesn't matter what kind, without outlining and planning and developing it first. This is especially true for fiction, but I also would say you don't want to do it with any other type of book either. So with nonfiction, I always outline my entire book so I know exactly what I have to write. It makes it a whole lot easier and faster. And if you know for sure that you want to write nonfiction and you just got super inspired and excited about this, then also be sure to check out my upcoming workshop that's happening. It starts on March 19th. Officially, we go into pre-mode where we're actually outlining and planning out the details of the nonfiction book. And then it's 10 days of writing and getting that damn thing published on Amazon. So it's called Write and Publish Your Nonfiction Ebook in 10 days. I know that sounds scary, but it's not as scary as it sounds when you do the pre-work and actually outline and get your stuff just figured out ahead of time. It actually goes a lot faster. Plus, when you're working along with a group, I like to call this NaNoWriMo for nonfiction writing because that's basically what it is. You can check that workshop out by going to jenniferblanchard.net/10 days, and I will see you guys for the training tomorrow.